All right, we have a successful deployment. Only took a couple more minutes for that deployment to actually kick off and finish, but you can see here it's got the location of the installation updated here, as well as the deploy successful here. So I can go ahead and exit out of this command prompt. And if I refresh my services window now, I should have the dispatcher services. So here's the dispatcher client, here's the dispatcher module, and here's the dispatcher schedule. So all three have been created. And then you can see that the module folder is also here. Inside of the bin directory, you can see that it is also provided the service, the run module to run it locally, as well as the set module environment and Windows service. So basically the same thing, and here's the policy. So in here, it's got its own cache, configuration scripts. So the dispatcher module has translators that are available, and this trans module file here is going to give you some of the settings. So where the stage directory is in here. So the stage directory, the scheduler URI, if the port changes and you don't use Deployment Center to update that. Logs directories, and gives you nice descriptions on what you can use for the values in these. Just note there are some that are commented out for additional use cases. So I'm just going to close that. That's one that I would typically control. And then the translators, if I open this one up, this is going to basically say which translators are turned on. And this async service right here, the configuration of the async service, you can see is active is true. It tells you where the translator folder is, as well as what it executes when this runs. So all three of these are important, especially if you're needing to put like environment variables in, or if you're trying to hardpoint the utility or the script itself to execute against DC proxies PWF file, for instance. Those would be reasons why you could do it. There are descriptions to put in here, and then you can see some additional inputs. Configuration of all the other translators can be done this way. I like to use Deployment Center to mark those so that my deployment matches up to what I have in here. But this is another file that I may or may not keep, just kind of source controlled, so I have an original copy of what the configuration was. Log4j2, this is where you can adjust your log settings. So if you open this up, you can go in and in here just kind of replace your configuration settings. Typically, they'll tell you what the definition of what you can replace is. And a lot of times, if you submit tickets in for broken or for what seems to be a malfunction, troubleshooting, something like that, the request will be to enhance your logging to get better information. Typically, I'll take a look at all the logs at a debug level before I submit a ticket, just to see if can come across anything that would be obvious. So back to module, you also have a samples folder in here, just sample configuration files for translators for customization. The translators are all in here. Here's the async service one. I did install a couple of others. Just note that when you open it up, there will be a README here. Highly recommend to read it. It will provide information if you need licenses and what prereqs that you might need. So in the async service, if I open this up, I have come across situations where I want to run this with a PWF file. So I'll add UPG, username, password, and group to the end of this, and say U equals DC proxy dash P equals or PF equals, and then I'll say to my PWF file. That maybe I use password encrypt in that installation bin to generate. So a couple of use cases why you might want to source control or update these files. I'll go ahead and close this out. If I come out of module, go into scheduler, we've got the bin we talked about, we've got a cache here, and then the configuration directory and libraries. In here, same log4j. We also have task, and then the trans scheduler. This trans scheduler file, if I come down in here, it defines what port it's running on. So if the 2001 port is the default port, a lot of times you can't keep that. You have log directory locations. If you want to sending email generated by the scheduler, so get notifications. You've got additional things like CC emails, number of event logs that can be created. Default is 3. If I come down even further than this, there's a lot of different settings in here I highly recommend taking a look at. So I'll close that, come back out, and then the dispatcher client folder. If I come in, we looked at the bin, it's got its cache, and then it's got its configuration. It's got its service configuration here. If I open that up, you can see that that's the URL it's pointing to go through the web tier. That's where the web tier service is executing. And then you can see different information about where DC proxy, the database user, different service settings, and so on and so forth are set. So definitely explore this for additional options beyond the base install and consult the Siemens docs. If I go back to here, you can see that there are docs specifically for this, and they're the developer docs. So if you're interested in customization at all, those will give you kind of a peek into what is available to extend. The install is going to be the install folder. This is going to be different things like the environment settings during the installation. So you can see different things like preferences that were imported. You've got different translator settings, etc. Library directory, sample development files for integration and utilities for dispatcher, as well as the schema. So if I come back up here, we've kind of talked about each and every one of these folders, the admin client, etc. So let's go ahead and see if our original use case works now. I'm gonna just validate that all of the services are up. Close this out. Go back to my Explorer window. We started a couple of videos ago. And then I've got my folder here inside of my home folder. I am an admin user, and my goal is to import this assembly. So I'm gonna come in here. I'm gonna say import export, and then I'm gonna say import PLMXML. Using the same options, I can drag and drop like I did last time. I can also choose my file. Now remember, I am jumping into apps, and let me pull this down a little. I'm gonna go into my media, Siemens, test data, and then I've zipped up my grinding assembly. So just note inside of that, it's just the PLMXML file as well as the file or folder set that correlates for all my data sets. I'm going to be picking my configured data import default, transfer mode, and I'm going to choose import. So now, instead of getting an error message, I get this has been sent out, and I will get notified. If I come into here, my launcher, and look at my tools, notice that one thing that I did not see in here is dispatcher. So I'm just doing a second look, and then I'm going to go ahead and switch out of author and switch into active admin since I'm a DBA user. And then in here, I'm going to select the launcher. And you'll notice there are no additional tools here for dispatcher or in the full tool list. So I don't have an administrative console here, so we'll have to take a look at potentially adding one and maybe customization routes, or take a look at Siemens and see if they've provided one since then. However, inside of my alerts, which are in this bell way up at the top here, I should get an alert whenever this is completed. So you can see this has got nothing in it at the moment. And then when it completes that process, I will get that. I can track this by going into the dispatcher directory. If I go into Siemens, Teamcenter 2512, dispatcher. Now, if I look at the stage directory, it has a deployment center folder in it. It has given it a UID. So this essentially now is a dispatcher request object. In here, I have a result folder, and then I have the configuration and the input. The result folder has the output and the async service log. And if I view that output, you can see that this was the user session state was created. It invoked the import of objects at that point. And then if I look at the async service log, it came in and it was successful. So it was able to do everything it needed, no errors. If I come back out, everything looks like it has completed. And if I go into my bell again, notice nothing is showing up. So there is an interval that's set for how often this gets sent out. There also could be something that isn't quite right. Like being able to investigate that dispatcher request object would be fairly important. So I'm going to come into my rich client real quick and just do a quick check on this. If I go into my home folder, notice I have a translation option in this client now. That translation option has an administrative console. And this is in here, it says the dispatcher management preferences have not been installed using default values. So in here, please install dispatcher client for the administrative console to operate properly. If I open this up and hit search, nothing shows up. So I had actually done a deployment at one point. Let me go ahead and hit close on this. This was open from the deployment. And then I'm going to go in and launch that client again. So just a couple of oddities as you're running through this the first time. If you're just kind of clicking through, these are the things you're going to encounter while you're troubleshooting and trying to get everything up. I'm going to come into my administrative user. Now I am logging in as InfoDBA at the moment. I need to be logging in as that admin01 because the alert that is getting sent to that admin is going to be shown for only that admin. Now the reason I'm logging into InfoDBA on the rich client versus admin01 on the main is I'm only using the rich client to view something, and I wanted to give a perspective of another DBA. So if another DBA or you logs in, you can see that in this administrative console for the rich client, it actually has tracked that task ID. So that ID lines up to what you see inside of the stage directory in the DC. So that is equal to that. So I know that this is the status for that. And I've got a complete mechanism here. So this is actually went from a couple of different states. It started at initial, and then it went into translating, and then it could have potentially stopped at scheduled, and then it completes. So there are more than this, but generally speaking, you'll see these. A couple others, or another one is terminal. So basically, this is the state that it went through for us. Now, scheduled happened really quick for us. It basically cleans the files, completes the task, but initial takes a moment as it submits it to the scheduler. Once it hits the module and the scheduler, then it begins to actually do the translation. And that's where you'll see it's translating. Once they kick back and the files are brought back to the server, that's when it'll switch to either scheduled or complete. Now there are variations to that, but generally speaking. Now up here you can, if you have a lot of different dispatcher requests, you can select one and you can say refresh request or F5, and then that just kind of refreshes it, make sure that you have the latest info. You can hit search, which just kind of, this gets stale, it has to be reloaded. So this will reload the whole page, whereas this one will reload what is selected. This one will resubmit the request, so be careful with this one. It actually we'll send it back in and you'll get a secondary. The delete request will delete it. And then the request properties, if you select it, will give you a better kind of listing of it. You can see arguments that have been submitted and log file locations in the history. So in our case, it went from preparing instead of initial to scheduled to translating, loading, and then complete. So you can see there's a couple of extras in there, and scheduled happened before translating in our case. So the user that kicked it off is defined here, and so on and so forth. So in Active Workspace, I don't see this capability right off, but we'll see if we can submit a video on adding it in. You'll notice that in the background, I now have a little 1 over my alert. It took a little bit, and we'll have to look at the polling intervals on those. I click that alert, and it'll give me a little information about that test assembly 01. The import failed on this, so we'll have to take a look at why the import would have failed. So we can click it, and in this case it failed. It said an error has occurred during processing some of the objects. Now this may be an okay failure for me, so I may have still got everything that I wanted, but I could look further into why this happened. So it tells me that the assembly 01 is right here. It's a related object. You can see that a text document is here. So I'm going to start by opening up the attachment, and I'm just going to say, okay, let's right click on it. And notice I don't have an open. I could put an open here. I'm going to go up to open and say open a new tab. That way I get a secondary tab here to kind of identify it. And if I scroll down, you can see that this log has all of this information in it. Received this error. It was unable to find a property with a specific name for an element, and that's pretty much all the way across all those objects. So it's looking for a specific property for this value, but it wasn't stored in the error stack. And it just kind of repeats. It's probably something to do with version compatibility. Let's go ahead and search and see if we still get the objects. So the objects that would have been brought in, let me look at this related assembly, test assembly. That is a direct link to what got brought in with that import. And this is the grinding custom assembly that I wanted to use to test visualization out. So if I open this, you can see that in this list with summary view, or list view is what they're calling it now, I can see different things like the overview, different sections in here. I can toggle between things, but what I want to look at is visualization. I toggled once, and what it did was it actually loaded up this little visualization component. You can see here. So I don't have any visualization services up and running at the moment. So if I go to Teamcenter, notice that Teamcenter visualization doesn't exist. This component is now a part of the microservices deployment. So I didn't have to get any additional services running for Viz because Viz services don't exist as they used to. So this spun up really, really fast in this case, and I'm able to get the origin here rotating, so I know something's there. Let me go ahead and go to the 3D tab here, and you'll see that I've got this, and it pops up. So I'm going to go ahead and open it into a structural kind of view, and you can see that I have my content selected up at the top. I can switch between relations, details, and content. And then I'm going to pull this down, this details, and select 3D. So if I do that, this big area is going to represent my assembly. And if there are any objects underneath of that assembly, then it will display. Since it was an assembly and I was looking at it, that's why that little mechanism didn't work. So I've got this full assembly here, and I can 3D render on this VM with 32 gig of RAM. Now, you have to scale up your visualization system and tweak the microservices settings. Once you get a little bit more into visualization, you want to start streaming massive components of millions of parts, you're going to have to look at some of the newer capabilities that mixing indexing and other components with visualization gives you. But all in all, this is extremely fast. This assembly is not necessarily a super tiny assembly, so it goes a few levels deep here. Yep. So there's a lot to it. If I select, it's fairly active. So I selected this one subassembly, and you can see all the parts. It's spinning pretty good. I am running on an Amazon machine. And then you'll notice that with a base license, I don't really have too much on the license side of the house here. So just with the base, I get all of these components. So this is all working. One other thing that you'll see here that kind of changes with that is this home page is coming up with a link to this, so that's great. I don't have to search on it. But I do want to search that my indexer picked up on the new data. So what I'm going to do is notice I don't have a search bar up across the top here. The reason for that is I'm in active admin. So I'm going to switch over to author and just make sure that that component is now searchable and that my indexer is truly working. So I'm going to say 909. It has been a minute, and you can see my indexing service is actually still picking up on new data. So all of this got created. And the reason I came over here to begin with is just to show that this preview does work if you're on a singular part. So this is actually going to load up, and I can see that component right here. And I do have limited capabilities, or pretty much all the capabilities that I would have had in the structural view under the 3D. If I go to 3D here, I can make it a lot bigger and interact with it. But just note in the overview tab, I have this full screen mode that I could interact with it as well. So I can exit full screen mode, and we have basically tested that dispatcher is working with the asynchronous side. We need to look at whether or not it's async service delivering this or if it's the PLMXML service. Probably the latter on that case as a part of that dispatcher configuration. The other thing that we want to look at here is that typically in the visualization installation in like 2506, there was a set of preferences that were available. And if I go to active admin, go to my tools in my launcher, go to preferences, then I can go in and I can say SSR, server-side rendering. And if you come in, there was a set of preferences that define server-side or client-side rendering. And out of the default ones, you get this AWV02D viewer render option. And if you select them, notice it says it determines which technology should be used in Active Workspace 2D Viewer. So you get Viz serverless, or you get CSR or SSR. Now, in this case, this is serverless, so this is the new architecture that came into play. We don't have a Viz Server Manager or a Viz Assigner anymore in this basic install. So in here, if you're using the legacy systems, they did keep an option there, but there is no need to switch between CSR and SSR anymore in the build. All right, so we have completed that full installation. Just note that all of our recommendations and our walkthroughs are just kind of opening the box, introducing the client, introducing you to those concepts, and you should always focus back on the documentation and get those certifications before working in those production environments.